There's an ice cream brand in Japan called Gari-Gari-kun. It's been around since 1981 and offers some very, very cheap popsicles. It also offers some kind of weird flavors like corn soup, and after over 40 years, it's not only gained a lot of popularity, but it's also gained a lot of love. Now, in 2016, the company that owns this brand, they had to raise the prices for the first time in 25 years. And they had to raise it by about 10 yen, which is like 6 cents. And because of this raise in price, they did something a little bit strange. They gathered everyone in the company, including the CEO, and made an advertisement where they were apologizing for the 6-cent increase in price. This is the first time they've changed the price in 25 years. It's not like they were changing it every month. But again, they gathered everyone in the company, including the CEO, and went on camera to bow in front of everyone and apologize to the public for raising the price of their beloved ice cream. It does feel like a very Japanese thing, the idea that you owe your customers an explanation, and you should actually care about how much they're paying for your product. Or at least you might think that's the Japanese way. What makes this a little more ironic is that in June of this year, Akagi Nugyo was one of the 6 ice cream companies rated by Japan's Fair Trade Commission. They were under suspicion of secretly coordinating price increases without telling anyone. The 6 companies are, and sorry if I mispronounce them, but I haven't heard half of these, Meiji, Lotte, Morinaga Seika, Morinaga Nugyo, Eizaki Glico, and as previously mentioned, Akagi Nugyo. Together, they control more than half of Japan's retail ice cream market. The suspicion that I mentioned earlier was that the executives of those 6 companies were exchanging information with each other. They would do this during meetings and emails, and talk about upcoming price increases, and essentially coordinate to raise suggested retail prices together, in increments of, can you guess it, 10 yen. And this would take place over a period of several years, slowly raising the price. Now, all 6 of these companies happen to be members of the Japanese Ice Cream Association, which is kind of a weird idea on the surface level, though not uncommon. You have an industry association where the competitors all sit in the same room regularly, which is completely legal and normal. And it also just so happens to be a great place to coordinate things you're not supposed to be coordinating. The companies have been citing real issues as to why they have to increase their price, saying the material cost is going up and shipping is costing more, which yes, that does make sense. However, the ice cream industry is doing better than ever. 2025 was actually the 6th consecutive record year for ice cream shipment value in Japan. A total of 663 billion yen, which is up about 40% from a decade ago, all despite Japan's population shrinking the entire time. So the companies are having some of their best years ever, and despite that, the prices are still going up, which is a little weird. And the investigators thought, what if these aren't independent decisions? What if all these companies are coming together as a group to maximize profits? However, there is one thing that kind of makes it hard to prove that. In Japan, companies commonly announce price increases publicly in advance, before they actually take effect. The stated reason being to give customers time to prepare, which while yes, it is a polite thing to do, it kind of gives an excuse saying, no, we weren't talking behind everyone's back, they just announced it, so we also raised our prices too. And while it does have the same results, that is completely legal because they're not doing any internal coordination and hiding it from people. And despite that having the exact same results for everyone in the public buying the ice cream, legally, it is different. They're not actively coordinating with each other to raise the prices and change the market. They're just reacting to what other people do, or at least that's what they say. And this story isn't really resolved yet. But what I did keep thinking about when reading this was, this isn't really an uncommon anomaly, and I've actually heard it a few times. Even if they weren't actively coordinating with each other here, Japan does have a history of companies all coming together. Even though on the outside they are competitors, they kind of work together as one unit. The word for it is dango, round dumpling consultation, which is a strange name for a crime. In practice, it refers to bid rigging, specifically the practice where companies that are supposed to be competing for government contracts secretly meet beforehand. In those meetings, they figure out who is going to win and submit bids designed to make that outcome happen. And it all comes at an inflated price. But why would anyone agree to this? Why wouldn't they just try to win themselves? Well, because the winner rotates every time. Everyone ends up getting a turn, at least if you're in those meetings. And they even have a clever word for the person who wins those, champion. Champion. Yep. This has probably been the most pervasive in construction, which makes sense because that's where a lot of the big government contracts are. Roads, bridges, dams, public buildings, and a whole slew of other things. And the schemes work because of another practice called amakudari, which means descent from heaven. That is the tradition of retiring government officials taking jobs at private companies in the industries they used to regulate. That sounds extremely bad, like it shouldn't happen, but it does. You can immediately see the problems with it. So just imagine a scenario where you have a bureaucrat who spent 20 years at a public highway corporation, and when he retires, a construction company hires him. And with his experience and connections, he happens to know things. Maybe say the confidential ceiling price for upcoming bids, the maximum the government will accept, and with that information, the company no longer needs to guess anymore. They know exactly how high they can inflate the price and still win. It sounds like cheating. Maybe it is. There's a good example from the 1980s that I think illustrates this pretty well. An American company decided to bid on a contract for some construction work at the US Yokosuka Navy base. They had no idea that there was a bid rigging operation going on. They submitted what they thought was a competitive bid at half the price of the other companies. And afterwards, they apparently heard about the Japanese companies complaining, saying they don't know how the bidding works. You can't just give the actual bid of how much you should be paid, you have to raise it up. And that's maybe not surprising when you look at post-war history. Japan's anti-monopoly law was made in 1947 during the US occupation, specifically to break up the old zaibatsu conglomerates and prevent that kind of concentrated power from coming back. It was modeled pretty closely on American antitrust law, and actually the Japanese version was a lot stricter. Keyword there is was. It was in its original form. But as soon as Japan gained its full sovereignty in 1952, the laws started to be softened. Export cartels were exempted almost immediately. The government's Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, actively followed the cartel activity as part of an industrial policy. There were apparently more than 1,500 cartel activities that went unprosecuted during this time. The idea is that they wanted Japanese companies to get ahead internationally, but in order to do so, they had to get ahead domestically as well. It was an ends justify the means scenario. However, when you reach those ends, you usually keep going with the means. So even though it did work for a while and it made some very, very powerful companies in Japan, it also became deeply ingrained with the culture and led to a lot of competitors, even when they didn't have to, they would just coordinate because that's what you did. I mean, it's good for everyone, right? At least the people making the decisions, but that's all they care about. Some of the scandals that followed from this were very large in scale. Take an example from 2005. Investigators uncovered what was described at the time as the largest and most highly organized bid rigging scheme in Japan's history. 2 bid rigging cycles had allegedly been splitting Japan's $3 billion annual steel bridge market between them for up to 40 years. That is an insanely long time to go unnoticed. And also fitting that, criminal charges were filed against more than 40 different companies. Executives from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Kawasaki Heavy Industries were among those charged. Even board members from Japan's Public Highway Corporation, the government entity who awarded the contracts. Of course, they also ended up being charged for making the scheme work. Though that record didn't last. In 2019, the Fair Trade Commission issued fines totaling 39.9 billion yen against 8 road building companies. This was for price fixing on asphalt mixtures, the largest Japanese antitrust penalty in history at that time. And then a few years later in 2023, the record got absolutely shattered. The JFTC fined several major electric power companies a combined 101 billion yen. This was for forming a cartel over electricity sales. And that is the highest fine ever given out under Japan's Anti-Monopoly Act. More recently in 2025, Dentsu and Hakuhodo, Japan's 2 biggest advertising agencies, were ordered to pay 3.3 billion yen in fines for bid rigging the contracts for managing operations at the Tokyo Olympics. In the same year, the staffing industry got its first ever antitrust investigation. 5 major temp agencies, including Recruit Staffing, were raided on suspicion of coordinating a wage increase in dispatch fees after meeting in 2022. Raiding just means they have an inspector show up before they can burn papers or anything. They're not literally SWAT raiding them, in case that wasn't clear. And really recently, in March of this year, 8 petroleum distributors were hit with a criminal investigation over suspected diesel fuel price fixing in Tokyo. So, the point there is it literally happens everywhere. While I mentioned the ice cream example at the beginning, they do have some sort of deniability, but even if they are completely innocent, this is such a common problem in Japan, I find it extremely fascinating. Also kind of sad, but it is extremely fascinating. It's like cheating in a board game, except everyone on the board game is cheating together, and they're just kind of lying to the people watching them play the board game. And even though they softened the laws back then, over time they have gotten a lot more aggressive, and they're putting a lot more work into stopping this. While it is initially really good to have a very, very powerful company to go out internationally, it does really hurt the domestic companies, and that is important. One of the methods they actually used to stop this was introduced all the way back in 2006. a leniency program where the first company to basically snitch on the other companies, they would get a reduced or no fine at all. I suppose it depends on how early they reported it and how much they actually put into it at that point. And that is apparently one of the main ways they actually catch these now. So one of those 6 ice cream companies could have ratted on the other ones and said, we are fixing the prices and we are agreeing to raise it by 10 yen. Which, if that is the case, they probably will be able to prove it, and they won't be able to just say, we saw it on the advertisement, so of course we raised the price. Which is a good thing, but we still don't know if it was that yet. That also doesn't mean they have like a super big conscience, though. If you rat on all the other companies and they face a bunch of fines, that could be good for your company. So they're not just purely being good people. I don't know. But thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. Please like, subscribe. Thanks. Bye-bye.